The gate guard at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado barely glanced at Kira Brennan's transfer orders before waving her through. She guided her weathered Ford pickup past the checkpoint, taking in the organized chaos of one of the Navy's most elite training facilities. Groups of soaking wet candidates stumbled through the sand in full gear while instructors shadowed them with megaphones. The Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly to her left, its gray-blue surface churning with morning fog that would burn off within the hour. Kira had seen dozens of bases across 3 continents during her 12 years of service, but Coronado held a particular reputation. This was where SEALs were forged, where the toughest men in the military came to prove themselves. She wondered how they would react to a woman teaching them hand-to-hand combat. Her knuckles tightened slightly on the steering wheel. The assignment had come through official channels 3 weeks ago. Lieutenant Commander Vincent Ashford needed an advanced combat instructor for a specialized training rotation. Her name had been recommended by Naval Special Warfare Command after her work with coalition forces in Afghanistan. She had trained operators from 6 different countries in close-quarters combat techniques that had saved lives in urban environments. But recommendations and reality were 2 very different things. Before we dive into this story, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you have witnessed similar situations where someone had to prove themselves against unfair assumptions in your community. Kira parked outside the administrative building, a plain concrete structure that looked identical to every other military office she had ever entered. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed overhead while a young petty officer directed her to the 2nd floor. Lieutenant Commander Ashford's office door stood open, revealing a trim man in his mid-40s studying a computer screen with intense concentration. He looked up when she knocked, his expression shifting from distraction to professional welcome. "Please, come in, Sergeant First Class Brennan," he said, standing to shake her hand. His grip was firm without being performative. "I appreciate you taking this rotation on short notice." Kira settled into the chair across from his desk. The office walls displayed the usual collection of certificates, unit photos, and commendations. One frame showed Ashford with a group of SEALs somewhere desertan and dangerous. "Your message mentioned some resistance to the program," she said. Ashford's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "That is putting it diplomatically. We have some instructors here who believe that hand-to-hand combat training should remain internal to SEAL teams. They view outside expertise as unnecessary at best and insulting at worst." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "The fact that you are a woman compounds their resistance." Kira had expected this. She had faced it in 3 previous assignments and would likely face it in 3 more. "Understood," she said. "What kind of interference am I looking at?" "Nothing that should prevent you from running the course," Ashford replied. "But do not expect enthusiasm. Staff Sergeant Derek Holloway in particular has been vocal about his opposition. He is a SEAL instructor with significant influence among the candidates." Ashford met her eyes directly. "I need you to know that you have my full support and the backing of Special Warfare Command. If anyone crosses the line, I want to hear about it immediately." Kira nodded. She had learned long ago that promises of support were easy to make in air-conditioned offices. The real test came on training mats when egos and prejudices collided with military hierarchy. "Your first session is tomorrow morning at 0700, Ashford continued, sliding a folder across his desk. "Course curriculum, trainee roster, and facility details. You will have the main combat training gymnasium. Equipment has been inspected and updated per your requirements list." She took the folder without opening it. "How many students?" 42, mixed group. About half are SEAL candidates at various stages of training. The rest are regular sailors who qualified for advanced combat instruction. All volunteers." Ashford leaned back in his chair. "I will be there for your first session to make introductions and establish your authority." Kira recognized the political calculation behind that decision. Ashford's presence would provide initial cover, but she would need to establish her own credibility quickly. One session with administrative protection would not be enough if the resistance ran as deep as his carefully measured words suggested. She left his office with the folder and her doubts, both weighing heavier than they should. The base housing unit smelled like industrial cleaning solution and old carpet. Kira unpacked methodically, arranging her gear with the precision that came from years of temporary assignments. Her uniforms went into the closet first, then her personal training equipment. The foam roller, resistance bands, and jump rope occupied one corner of the small room. On the desk, she placed a framed photo of her graduating class from Marine Corps Martial Arts Program instructor course. 23 faces staring back at her with the confidence of people who had survived something genuinely difficult. She reviewed the course curriculum that evening, noting the gaps in the existing program. The training focused heavily on raw aggression and overwhelming force, which worked when you had size and strength advantages. But Kira had learned in actual combat that technique and timing beat power more often than people wanted to admit. She had seen operators half the size of their opponents control fights through superior positioning and leverage. That was what she intended to teach, whether the students wanted to learn it or not. Sleep came intermittently. Her mind kept running through potential scenarios, calculating variables. By 05:30, she was awake and moving through her morning routine. A 3-meal run along the beach. Stretching. A light breakfast of oatmeal and black coffee. She dressed in her instructor uniform, checking that everything met regulation standards. The mirror showed a woman in her early 30s with shoulder-length dark hair, pulled back in a regulation bun, gray-green eyes that gave away nothing, and the kind of lean muscle that came from functional training rather than gym vanity. The combat training facility was a converted airplane hangar, vast and echoing. Kira arrived an hour before class time. The space impressed her immediately. Heavy bags hung from ceiling mounts. Grappling mats covered most of the floor. Weight equipment lined one wall. A small office area occupied the far corner with windows overlooking the training floor. Someone had invested real money in this facility, which meant someone important cared about the program. She walked the perimeter, testing mat surfaces and checking equipment. Everything was new or well-maintained. She arranged training dummies in specific positions for her initial demonstrations. The morning light filtered through high windows, creating geometric patterns across the blue mats. Footsteps echoed in the vast space. Kira turned to see trainees filing in through the main entrance. They came in small groups, most wearing the standard Navy PT uniform of blue shorts and gray shirts. Some looked fresh and eager. Others moved with the confident swagger of people who had already proven themselves. Their conversations died as they noticed her, replaced by the kind of careful assessment that made her skin prickle with familiar irritation. A young petty officer approached with obvious nervousness. "Ma'am, should we start warming up?" Kira nodded. Standard warm-up routine. Light jog around the perimeter, then dynamic stretching. No contact work until we begin officially. The trainee hurried off to spread the word. Groups began moving, some jogging dutifully, while others stretched with the lazy confidence of people who believed they already knew everything. Kira caught fragments of conversation, words that were not quite whispered enough. Daycare instructor, diversity hire, babysitter. She had heard worse. She remained near her demonstration area, projecting calm authority while internally cataloging who would be problems and who might actually learn something. More trainees arrived. The facility was filling up, maybe 50 people now instead of the 42 on the roster. Word must have spread that something interesting was happening. Then the energy in the room shifted noticeably. A group of men entered through the side door, moving with the kind of fluid coordination that marked serious operators. They wore instructor uniforms and carried themselves like people accustomed to being the most dangerous in any room. The man leading them stood at least 6'3" with shoulders that strained his uniform shirt. His brown hair was cut high and tight, his jaw square and clean-shaven. Even from across the facility, Kira could read his body language. This was a man who owned spaces, who expected deference and usually received it. His eyes swept the room and locked onto her with undisguised contempt. Staff Sergeant Derek Holloway. It had to be. His reputation had preceded him, and now the reality stood before her, radiating hostility like heat from asphalt. He said something to the men around him. They laughed, the sound carrying across the mats. Several trainees glanced nervously between Holloway's group and Kira, sensing the tension building before the class had even officially started. Lieutenant Commander Ashford entered through the main doors precisely at 0700. He carried himself with the relaxed authority of someone who did not need to prove anything. Behind him walked an older chief petty officer with gray threading through his hair and the weathered face of someone who had spent decades in hard places. The room came to attention automatically. Ashford waved them to ease. "Good morning, everyone," he said, his voice carrying easily across the space. "Welcome to Advanced Hand-to-Hand Combat Training. This course will run for the next 12 weeks and will push your understanding of close-quarters combat beyond what you have learned in basic training." He gestured toward Kira. "This is Sergeant First Class Kira Brennan. She will be your primary instructor. She comes to us with extensive combat experience and credentials that frankly exceed anything we have on base." Kira caught Holloway's reaction. His lip curled slightly, a sneer that he did not bother to hide. Several of the SEAL candidates around him exchanged glances. Ashford continued with administrative details, while Kira moved to the center of the training area. She could feel dozens of eyes on her, measuring and doubting. The chief petty officer who had entered with Ashford took a position near the back wall, arms crossed, watching everything with the patient attention of someone who had seen this movie before. When Ashford finished and stepped aside, Kira began without preamble. "Hand-to-hand combat is not about being the strongest person in the fight," she said, her voice carrying clearly without shouting. "It is about understanding leverage, timing, and anatomy. A smaller opponent with superior technique will defeat a larger opponent with inferior technique every single time. Real combat proves this repeatedly." A snort of derision came from Holloway's direction. He was not quite subtle enough for it to go unnoticed. Several trainees shifted uncomfortably. Kira continued as if she had heard nothing. "We will start with fundamental principles. First, balance and center of gravity." She moved into a fighting stance, demonstrating the distribution of weight. "Your power comes from the ground up, through your legs and hips, not from your arms. Most people fight with their upper body and wonder why they gas out in 90 seconds. She called for a volunteer. A young sailor raised his hand tentatively, a kid who looked barely old enough to shave. He approached the mat with obvious nervousness. Kira put him at ease with clear instructions, positioning him in a basic stance and walking him through proper foot placement. As she demonstrated a simple hip throw, breaking down each component of the movement, Holloway's voice cut across the room. "This is basic academy stuff. When do we get to actual combat training?" Kira completed the demonstration before acknowledging him. She helped the young volunteer back to his feet and turned to face Holloway directly for the first time. "Actual combat training builds on fundamentals, Sergeant. Rushing past basics is how people get hurt in real situations." Holloway pushed off from a wall where he had been leaning. "I have been in real situations," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria. Real combat is not this choreographed demonstration nonsense. It is violent, fast, and the person who hits hardest wins." He looked around at the other SEAL candidates, playing to his audience. "This is the kind of training that gets people killed when they think they can dance around someone who wants to rip their head off." Several of his group nodded in agreement. Kira noted which ones, filing away the information. The room had gone very quiet, everyone sensing the confrontation building. "Technique fails when adrenaline hits," Holloway continued. "When someone is trying to kill you, all this leverage and timing theory goes out the window. You survive by being more aggressive, more violent, more willing to destroy your opponent. That is what SEAL training teaches. That is what works." Kira let him finish. Then she spoke calmly, her tone unchanged. "How many hand-to-hand combat engagements have you personally been in, Sergeant Holloway?" His jaw tightened. He had not expected the question. "Enough to know what works." "Specific number," she said. "How many times have you been in a fight where firearms were not an option and you had to control or neutralize an opponent with your hands. The silence stretched. Holloway's face was reddening. "That is not the point," he said. "Is exactly the point," Kira replied. "Combat experience with weapons does not automatically translate to expertise in hand-to-hand combat. There are different skill sets with different requirements." She turned back to the class. "Aggression and violence have their place. But without technique, they're just flailing. With technique, controlled aggression becomes devastating." Holloway took several steps onto the mat. "You're saying SEAL training is inadequate?" "I am saying that specialized training from a dedicated instructor will enhance whatever combatives experience you already have." Kira kept her body language neutral, non-threatening. "This course exists because Naval Special Warfare Command identified gaps in current training protocols." Holloway laughed, a harsh bark that echoed in the large space. Naval Special Warfare Command is run by desk officers who have not been downrange in a decade. They think classroom instructors with fancy credentials can teach warriors how to fight. He gestured dismissively at Kira. "No offense, but I doubt you have ever had someone actually trying to kill you." The assumption hung in the air like smoke. Multiple trainees were now watching with the horrified fascination of people witnessing a car accident. Lieutenant Commander Ashford opened his mouth to intervene, but Kira caught his eye and gave the slightest shake of her head. "Your doubt is noted, Sergeant," she said evenly. "Now, unless you have specific technical questions about the material, I will continue the lesson." Holloway stood his ground for a long moment, clearly weighing whether to escalate further. Finally, he returned to his position against the wall, radiating barely contained hostility. His group clustered around him, shooting dark looks at Kira. She resumed teaching, calling another volunteer to demonstrate defensive positioning. But the atmosphere had changed. Every word she spoke now felt weighted with challenge. Holloway provided running commentary under his breath, just loud enough for those near him to hear. His friends laughed at his jokes. Several trainees kept glancing between Kira and Holloway, uncertain where their attention should be. Kira demonstrated an arm lock, explaining the pressure points and joint mechanics that made the technique effective regardless of size difference. As she guided the volunteer through the movement, Holloway's voice carried across the room again. In a real fight, that arm would be broken in half the time it took to set up that lock. She released the volunteer and addressed Holloway directly. "Would you like to demonstrate an alternative technique, Sergeant?" He smiled, but there was nothing friendly in it. "I would like to see these miracle techniques work on someone who is not cooperating for the camera." The morning session ended with more disruptions than instruction. Kira had managed to cover basic principles and demonstrate several fundamental techniques, but Holloway's constant interference had poisoned the learning environment. Some trainees were clearly trying to absorb the material. Others had decided their loyalty lay with the SEAL instructor who promised them that aggression trumped technique. Lieutenant Commander Ashford approached her as the trainees filed out for their mid-morning break. "That was challenging," he said diplomatically. Kira wiped down a training dummy, not looking at him. "I have dealt with worse. I can have him removed from the facility during your instruction periods," Ashford offered. "His presence is clearly disruptive, and that would make me look weak to every trainee here," Kira replied. "They would assume I needed protection from leadership because I could not handle a hostile instructor." She finally met his eyes. "I appreciate the offer, Commander, but this needs to play out." Ashford nodded slowly, understanding the calculation even if he did not like it. "If it escalates beyond verbal harassment, I want to know immediately." After he left, Kira sat alone in the facility office reviewing her notes for the afternoon session. The silence felt heavy after the morning tension. She was considering which techniques to cover next when a soft knock interrupted her thoughts. A young woman stood in the doorway, a petty officer second class based on her rank insignia. She looked nervous, glancing back toward the main training floor as if checking whether anyone had followed her. "Ma'am, may I speak with you privately?" Kira gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Of course. What is your name?" "Petty Officer Lena Ramirez, ma'am." The woman sat on the edge of the chair, her posture rigid with tension. I wanted to warn you about Staff Sergeant Holloway. Kira set down her pen and gave Ramirez her full attention. I am listening. Ramirez took a breath. He has been harassing female personnel on this base for at least 8 months. Maybe longer. I transferred here last year, and within 2 weeks, he was making comments about my appearance, my capabilities, whether I belonged in the Navy. At first, it seemed like hazing, the kind of thing you're supposed to tough out. But it got worse. How much worse? Kira asked quietly. He spreads rumors, Ramirez said. He told people I was sleeping with my supervisor to get favorable evaluations. He made comments about my body in front of other sailors. When I reported to the gym for PT, he would follow me and critique my workout, saying women could not build real strength, that we were liabilities in combat situations. She paused, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. 3 other women transferred out because of him. 1 left the Navy entirely. Kira felt familiar anger building her chest, cold and controlled. Did anyone file formal complaints? 2 did, Ramirez said. Both complaints disappeared into the system. Holloway has connections with senior SEAL leadership. He has been with Special Warfare for 12 years. He has combat citations and a reputation as a hardcore operator. The complaints were dismissed as personality conflicts or differences in training philosophy. She met Kira's eyes. I'm telling you this because I saw what happened in there this morning. He is not going to stop. He will keep pushing until you break or until he makes you look incompetent in front of everyone. Why are you still here if the situation is that bad? Kira asked. Ramirez's jaw set with determination. Because I refuse to let him drive me out. I earned my place here. I am good at my job. If I leave, he wins, and the next woman who arrives will face the same thing. She leaned forward slightly. But you're different, ma'am. You have authority he cannot easily undermine. Maybe you can do what the rest of us could not. Kira considered the young petty officer across from her, seeing the mixture of hope and exhaustion in her face. How many women currently serve on this base? About 30 that I know of, Ramirez replied. Most keep their heads down and avoid areas where Holloway operates. It is not how things should be, but it is how they are. After Ramirez left, Kira sat in the quiet office and felt the weight of the situation settle on her shoulders. This was bigger than one hostile instructor disrupting a training course. This was systematic harassment that had been tolerated because the perpetrator wore the right uniform and had the right connections. She thought about the women who had been driven out, careers derailed, or destroyed by one man's toxic behavior. The afternoon session brought more of the same. Holloway arrived late with his entourage, making a show of his entrance. Kira was demonstrating joint manipulation techniques when he interrupted to suggest that in real combat, someone would just punch her in the face while she was setting up the lock. The trainees laughed nervously. Kira maintained her composure and continued teaching. She demonstrated pressure point strikes, explaining the nerve clusters that could incapacitate regardless of size difference. Holloway countered that adrenaline made people immune to pain, that pressure points were movie nonsense that did not work on trained fighters. By the end of the day, Kira had covered perhaps half the material she had planned. The rest of her time had been spent managing Holloway's disruptions and trying to maintain credibility with trainees who were receiving mixed messages about whose authority to respect. As she secured the facility for the evening, the chief petty officer who had observed the morning session approached. His uniform name, Tape Red Web. He looked like he had something to say, but was carefully considering his words. "You are Kira Brennan from the Urban Reaper program," he said finally. It was not a question. Kira studied him carefully. "That program is classified." Webb smiled slightly. "So, is my clearance level?" He extended his hand. "Chief Petty Officer Marcus Webb. I ran logistics support for counterinsurgency operations in Kandahar. I saw the results of your training firsthand. Your students saved a lot of lives." Kira shook Webb's hand, appreciating the firm grip and the recognition in his eyes. "It is good to know someone here understands what actual combat training looks like," she said. Webb glanced toward the exit where Holloway had departed minutes earlier. "That man is a problem," he said bluntly. "He has gotten away with his behavior because he produces results in his SEAL candidates and because he has friends in high places. but he is poison to unit cohesion. Have you tried addressing it through channels? Kira asked. Webb laughed without humor. I am a chief. Holloway is a staff sergeant with combat citations and a direct line to a captain who thinks the sun rises and sets on SEAL culture. My concerns get filed under personality conflicts. He crossed his arms. But you are here under orders from Naval Special Warfare Command. That gives you leverage he cannot easily dismiss. Only if I can prove my methods work, Kira said. Right now, half those trainees think I am wasting their time with theory, while Holloway represents real warrior culture. Webb nodded slowly. Then you need to demonstrate that your techniques work on someone who is not cooperating. Someone who represents everything those trainees aspire to be. His meaning was clear. Kira had been thinking the same thing since the afternoon session ended. The situation would not improve through attrition. Holloway would continue undermining her authority until the course became meaningless or until she was quietly reassigned. The only way forward was through direct confrontation. She needed to prove her methods against someone the trainees respected, someone whose defeat would be undeniable. The next morning brought fog rolling off the Pacific, thick enough to blur the buildings into ghost shapes. Kira arrived at the facility an hour early again, running through techniques in her mind. She had spent half the night reviewing options and had settled on a strategy that was risky but necessary. Trainees filtered in as the fog began lifting. The energy felt different today, anticipatory. Word had spread about the conflict between the SEAL instructor and the outside expert. People were choosing sides. Kira could see it in how they clustered, which groups avoided eye contact with her and which offered respectful nods. Holloway arrived exactly on time, which somehow felt more threatening than his previous late entrance. He moved to his usual position along the wall, surrounded by his loyal SEAL candidates. Today his expression showed calculation rather than open contempt. He was planning something. Kira began the session with advanced defensive techniques, demonstrating how to counter common attacks using minimal force and maximum efficiency. She called for volunteers and got several, working through scenarios methodically. For 20 minutes, Holloway remained silent, which made her more nervous than his previous interruptions. Then, as she was explaining joint locks against grabs, he spoke up. This is all well and good against compliant training partners, he said. But none of this works when your opponent is actually resisting, actually trying to hurt you. Kira released her volunteer and turned to face Holloway. The room went quiet instantly. These techniques have been proven in actual combat situations by operators across multiple theaters, she said. Proven by who? Holloway challenged. What classroom instructor has used these moves in real life or death situations? He pushed out from the wall. You keep talking about combat experience, but I'm betting you have never been in an actual hand-to-hand fight where someone wanted to kill you. The accusation hung in the air. Kira felt the attention of every person in the room focused on her response. This was the moment she had been expecting, the challenge that needed answering. Is that what you believe, Sergeant? I believe you're teaching theory that might work in controlled environments but fails in chaos, Holloway said. He started walking toward the mat, his confidence evident in every step. I believe you're doing these trainees a disservice by filling their heads with technical nonsense instead of teaching them the aggressive mindset that keeps you alive. Kira made her decision. The room seemed to hold its breath. Would you like to volunteer for the next demonstration, Sergeant Holloway? The question landed like a physical blow. Several trainees gasped. Holloway stopped mid-stride, his expression shifting from confidence to calculation to something that looked like anticipation. Around him, his group exchanged glances, a few smiling with predatory eagerness. Are you serious? He asked. Completely serious, Kira replied. You have concerns about these techniques working against resistance. I am offering you the opportunity to provide that resistance. We can demonstrate to everyone here whether technique or aggression prevails. Holloway's smile grew wider. He cracked his knuckles deliberately, making a show of it. You understand, I am not going to hold back, just because you are a woman, right? If we do this, it is full resistance. Real speed, real strength. I would expect nothing less, Kira said. She kept her voice level, her body language calm. That is the only way to prove the point. Chief Webb stepped forward from his position near the back. "Ma'am, is this wise?" Kira glanced at him briefly. "It is necessary, Chief." Lieutenant Commander Ashford had entered during the exchange. He looked alarmed. "Sergeant First Class Brennan, perhaps we should discuss this privately first." "With respect, Commander, there is nothing to discuss," Kira said. "Sergeant Holloway has questioned the validity of the training. The most effective way to address his concerns is through practical demonstration." She turned back to Holloway. "Unless you would prefer not to volunteer?" The challenge was unmistakable. Holloway could not back down now without losing face in front of every trainee who looked up to him. "Oh, I will volunteer," he said. "Someone needs to show these kids what happens when theory meets reality." The training mat suddenly felt like a stage with an audience of 50 holding their collective breath. Kira moved to the center of the space, rolling her shoulders to loosen the muscles. She had done this before in different contexts, proving herself against doubters who believed size and aggression were the only currencies that mattered in combat. But never with stakes quite this high, never with this many witnesses who would carry the story throughout the entire base. Holloway stepped onto the mat with the swagger of someone who had never lost a physical confrontation. He stood 6'3" and probably weighed 230 pounds, most of it muscle-built through years of punishing SEAL training. His reach advantage was considerable, his strength advantage even more so. To the trainees watching, this looked like a mismatch that would end in humiliation for the female instructor who had overstepped her authority. "Before we begin," Kira said, "I want to make the parameters clear. Sergeant Holloway will attempt to control me using whatever techniques he chooses. I will demonstrate defensive counters and control techniques. The objective is to show how leverage and positioning overcome strength advantages." Holloway laughed. "The objective is to show what happens in a real fight." He looked at the assembled trainees. "Watch closely, because this is the lesson your instructor did not plan to teach today." Lieutenant Commander Ashford approached the mat edge. "Both of you understand this is a training demonstration, not a personal conflict. Professional conduct is expected." "Understood, Sir," Kira said. Holloway just nodded, his eyes never leaving her. Ashford stepped back reluctantly. The room felt electric with anticipation. Chief Webb had moved closer, his expression concerned but also intensely curious. The SEAL candidates clustered together, many of them grinning with anticipation of watching their instructor dominate. A few trainees looked worried, including Petty Officer Ramirez, who stood near the back with her arms wrapped around herself. Kira assumed a ready stance, weight balanced, hands in a neutral guard position. Holloway took a wider stance, hands loose at his sides, projecting the confidence of someone who did not need to prepare because the outcome was already decided. "Whenever you are ready," Sergeant, Kira said. Holloway moved faster than his size suggested he could. He closed the distance in 2 quick steps and reached for her with both hands, trying to get control of her upper body. It was a classic aggressive opening, using his reach and strength to overwhelm before his opponent could establish positioning. Kira did not retreat. Instead, she moved slightly offline, letting his momentum carry him past his optimal grabbing position. As his hands grasped air where she had been a fraction of a second before, she stepped in close and captured his extended right arm. Her hands found the pressure points at his wrist and elbow with practiced precision. She rotated her hips, dropped her weight, and used his own forward momentum against him. Holloway went down hard, his arm locked at an awkward angle that gave him no leverage to resist. He hit the mat face first with enough force to make several trainees wince. The entire sequence had taken perhaps 2 seconds. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Holloway rolled immediately and came up to his feet, his face flushed. The confident smile was gone, replaced by genuine surprise and the first hints of anger. "That was luck," he said. Kira had already reset to her starting position. "Try again." This time Holloway approached more cautiously. He feinted with his left hand, then shot in low for a takedown, the kind of technique taught in wrestling and Brazilian jiu-jitsu. It was a solid move, one that should have worked given his size and speed advantages. But Kira had been teaching defenses against this exact takedown for 5 years. She sprawled her legs back, denying him the leverage he needed while maintaining her base. Her hands found the back of his neck, and she applied downward pressure at a specific angle, controlling his posture. Then she pivoted, used his committed momentum, and rolled him across her hip. Holloway tumbled across the mat, the throw executed so smoothly it looked choreographed. He came up faster this time, breathing harder, the flush on his face spreading to his neck. Around the room, the murmurs had grown louder. Several SEAL candidates were no longer smiling. Chief Webb's expression had shifted to something like satisfaction. Holloway charged straight at her, abandoning technique for pure aggression. He threw a heavy right hand that would have caused serious damage if it connected. Kira slipped the punch by millimeters, feeling the wind of it pass her face. She countered with a palm strike to his solar plexus, not hard enough to cause injury, but delivered with enough precision to make him grunt and pause. In that moment of hesitation, she stepped behind his lead leg, gripped his arm, and executed a textbook reap throw. Holloway's feet left the mat, and he crashed down on his back, the impact driving the air from his lungs with an audible whoosh. Kira stood over him, not gloating, just waiting. Her breathing was barely elevated. She had used minimal energy for maximum effect. Every movement economical and purposeful. "This is what technique looks like," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Size and strength matter, but skill and timing matter more." Holloway lay on the mat for a moment, his chest heaving, his eyes showing confusion mixed with mounting rage. He had expected to dominate, to prove his point through overwhelming force. Instead, he had been taken down 3 times in less than 2 minutes by someone nearly a foot shorter and 80 pounds lighter. The cognitive dissonance was written across his face. He climbed to his feet slowly, his movements less fluid now. His confidence had cracked, but his ego remained intact, and ego was dangerous. "You got lucky 3 times," he said. His voice had lost its mocking edge, replaced by something harder and more desperate. "But luck runs out." Kira saw the shift in Holloway's eyes and recognized the danger. A humiliated man with an audience was unpredictable, especially one accustomed to physical dominance. She kept her stance neutral but ready, aware that the demonstration had crossed from professional into personal territory. Holloway circled her now, moving laterally instead of charging straight in. He was learning, adapting, which made him more dangerous. His breathing had steadied and his expression had hardened into focused intensity. The mocking confidence was gone, replaced by the cold calculation of someone who genuinely wanted to hurt his opponent. Lieutenant Commander Ashford sensed the change too. "Sergeant Holloway, that is sufficient demonstration," he called out. "We have seen enough." Holloway ignored him completely, his attention locked on Kira. "This is not over," he said quietly, meant only for her. "You think you're proving something, but all you're showing is that you can handle a control training scenario. Real combat is different." "Then show me real combat," Kira replied, her voice equally quiet. "Prove your point, Sergeant." It was a deliberate provocation, and they both knew it. Holloway's jaw clenched. He feinted left and drove right, mixing up his approach, trying to keep her guessing. His hands shot out in a combination, striking and grabbing, testing her defenses. Kira deflected and evaded, using minimal movement to stay just outside his effective range. Holloway pressed harder, throwing more combinations, increasing his tempo. He was trying to overwhelm her through volume and aggression, the same approach that had probably worked for him countless times before. But Kira had fought opponents who hit harder and moved faster. She had trained with operators whose lives depended on their ability to end fights quickly and efficiently. She let him commit to a heavy overhand right, then stepped inside his arc where his power was weakest. Her elbow strike caught him in the floating ribs with surgical precision. Not hard enough to crack bone, but painful enough to make him gasp and shift his weight. In that fraction of face-skinned opening, she swept his front leg and drove him backward with a palm to his sternum. Holloway stumbled, but did not fall this time. He caught his balance and immediately surged forward, abandoning any pretense of technique. He was fighting on instinct and anger now, the worst combination for maintaining control. He grabbed for her with both hands, got hold of her uniform sleeve, and tried to use his weight advantage to drag her down. Kira did not resist the pull. Instead, she moved with it, using his own force to generate momentum. She executed a sacrifice throw, deliberately falling backward while maintaining control of his arm. As she went down, she planted her foot on his hip and extended her legs, launching him over her head. Holloway flipped through the air and crashed on his back with enough force that the entire mat seemed to shake. The crowd of trainees had grown silent now, no longer murmuring, just watching in stunned fascination. Several of the SEAL candidates looked at each other with expressions that mixed disbelief with dawning respect. Petty Officer Ramirez had both hands over her mouth. Holloway rolled to his side, slower now, his breathing ragged. A dark bruise was already forming on his ribs, where Kira's elbow had connected. His uniform was soaked with sweat, and his face had lost some of its angry flush, replaced by the pale exhaustion of someone pushing past their limits. Chief Webb moved closer to Ashford and spoke quietly. "Sir, this needs to stop before someone gets seriously injured." Ashford nodded and stepped toward the mat again. "Both of you stand down. This demonstration is concluded." But Holloway was already climbing to his feet, driven by something beyond reason. His pride had been shattered in front of every person whose respect he valued. The female instructor he had mocked and dismissed had humiliated him repeatedly. His entire worldview was collapsing, and he needed to restore it through the only means he understood. "I'm a Navy SEAL," he said, his voice hoarse but carrying. "You think your classroom techniques mean anything? I have survived BUD/S. I have operated in hostile territory. I have fought actual enemies who wanted me dead." His hands formed fists at his sides. "You are just a trainer who has never seen real action." The accusation was meant to wound, to dismiss her capabilities through the same assumptions that had started this confrontation. But Kira heard something else in his words, something desperate and broken. Holloway was not just defending his ego anymore. He was defending his identity, the core belief that being a SEAL made him superior to everyone else, especially to women who dared to enter his domain. "Then prove it," Kira said. She made her voice hard, pushing him toward the breaking point deliberately. "Show everyone here that your SEAL training is superior. Show them that aggression beats technique. Or admit that maybe you've been wrong about what makes an effective fighter." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the distant sounds from outside the facility seemed to fade away. Everyone present understood that something fundamental was being decided on that mat, something that went beyond a training demonstration. Holloway's expression twisted with rage and desperation. He did not move into a fighting stance this time. He just charged, roaring, abandoning all pretense of control or technique. It was pure violent aggression, the last desperate attempt of someone who had run out of options. Kira stood her ground and waited. She saw his attack with perfect clarity, saw the openings in his defense, saw the way his injured ribs affected his movement. She had broken down hundreds of fighters over her career, learned to read their patterns and predict their choices. Holloway was telegraphing everything. As he reached for her, she made her final move. Kira sidestepped Holloway's wild charge and captured his extended arm with both hands. Her grip was precise, fingers finding the exact pressure points that controlled his elbow joint. In one smooth motion, she rotated his arm outward while driving her shoulder into his, using the mechanical advantage of his own skeleton against him. Holloway tried to counter, but his momentum was already committed in the wrong direction. Kira maintained control of his arm while sweeping his leg. He went down hard again, this time with her following him to the mat, keeping pressure on a joint lock. She applied just enough force to make the danger clear without actually causing damage. Holloway slapped the mat twice, the universal signal for submission. Kira released immediately and stepped back, giving him space. The entire sequence had taken perhaps 4 seconds. The silence in the training facility was complete. 50 people had just watched a decorated Navy SEAL instructor get dominated repeatedly by a female sergeant who outweighed him by 80 pounds less. The implications rippled through the room like shock waves. Holloway lay on the mat, chest heaving, staring at the ceiling. His face showed a complex mixture of pain, exhaustion, and something that might have been existential confusion. Everything he believed about combat, about strength, about his own superiority had just been systematically dismantled in front of his peers and students. Lieutenant Commander Ashford moved onto the mat, his expression stern. "Sergeant Holloway, report to my office immediately after you have recovered. We will be discussing your conduct during this training session." Holloway slowly pushed himself to a sitting position. He did not look at Kira or anyone else. He just nodded silently and began the process of standing up, moving like someone much older than his years. Chief Webb addressed the assembled trainees. "What you just witnessed is exactly what Sergeant First Class Brennan has been trying to teach you. Size and strength are assets in combat, but they're not decisive factors when faced with superior technique and tactical thinking." He gestured to Kira. "This is why she is here. This is why Naval Special Warfare Command requested her specifically." The trainees were still processing what they had seen. Some of the SEAL candidates who had been laughing at Holloway's jokes earlier now looked embarrassed. Several regular sailors wore expressions of vindication, particularly the female personnel who had been watching from the periphery. Petty Officer Ramirez had tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling. Kira felt the adrenaline beginning to fade, replaced by the familiar exhaustion that followed any serious physical confrontation. She had won the immediate battle, but understood that the larger war was far from over. Holloway had allies, connections, people who would not appreciate seeing him humiliated regardless of the circumstances. As Holloway limped toward the exit, supported by one of his friends, he paused and looked back at Kira. His expression was difficult to read, anger mixed with something else. Respect, maybe, or just deeper resentment. "This is not over," he said quietly. "It is over," Kira replied. "You challenged the training and got your answer. Now either accept it and learn, or continue fighting reality until reality breaks you." Holloway held her gaze for a long moment, then turned and left. The door, closing behind him, felt like the end of something significant. Ashford approached Kira once Holloway had gone. "That was either brilliant or career suicide," he said quietly. "Possibly both." "It was necessary," Kira said. "The harassment, the undermining, the toxic culture he represents. It all needed to be addressed directly." She looked at the trainees who were now talking among themselves, replaying what they had witnessed. Those people needed to see that competence matters more than attitude. Ashford nodded slowly. "You realize he will file a complaint. He will claim you used excessive force, or that the demonstration was unfair somehow." "Let him file," Kira said. "Everything happened in front of 50 witnesses. I gave him every opportunity to back down. He chose escalation at every turn." The rest of the morning session proceeded in a completely different atmosphere. Trainees paid attention with genuine focus now. Questions were respectful and substantive. When Kira demonstrated techniques, people watched closely instead of dismissing them as theory. The SEAL candidates who had been loyal to Holloway seemed uncertain how to behave, their leader having been definitively proven wrong. During a break, several trainees approached Kira with questions about specific scenarios. A young sailor asked about defending against knife attacks. A SEAL candidate wanted to know more about the pressure point strikes she had used. Each question was answered with the same methodical clarity she had shown throughout the demonstration. Chief Webb pulled her aside between exercises. "You made an enemy today," he said bluntly. "Holloway has friends in Special Warfare Command. They will not take kindly to seeing one of their own beaten by an outsider, especially a woman." "I made an enemy the moment I arrived to teach a course he did not want taught," Kira replied. "At least now everyone knows where they stand." Webb smiled grimly. "Fair point. For what it is worth, that was the most impressive display of combatives I have seen outside of actual combat. Your reputation is well earned." The afternoon session brought even more change. Word had spread throughout the base about what happened in the training facility. Sailors who were not part of the course found reasons to pass by and observe through the windows. Some of the female personnel came to watch openly, standing along the back wall with expressions of quiet triumph. Kira taught advanced defensive tactics against multiple opponents, demonstrating how positioning and awareness could overcome numerical disadvantages. She called for volunteers and got them immediately, trainees eager to work with her now that her capabilities were beyond question. The techniques she demonstrated were complex, but she broke them down into understandable components, showing the mechanical principles that made them effective. One of the SEAL candidates, a younger man who had been part of Holloway's group, raised his hand during a demonstration. "Ma'am, I need to apologize. I assumed you did not know what you were talking about. I was wrong." Kira nodded acknowledgement. "Apology accepted. Use it as a learning opportunity. Assumptions about capability based on appearance or gender will get you killed in actual combat situations." As the day ended and trainees filed out, Kira felt the weight of what she had accomplished settling on her shoulders. She had proven her point decisively, but the cost would likely be significant. The summons came the next morning. Lieutenant Commander Ashford's assistant found Kira during her pre-dawn run along the beach and informed her that she was required at the Special Warfare Command building at 0800 hours. The tone suggested this was not a routine meeting. Kira showered and dressed in her service uniform, the formal attire that signaled official business. As she walked across the base, she noticed the attention she drew. Sailors stopped conversations to watch her pass. Some offered respectful nods. Others looked away quickly, unwilling to be associated with someone who might be in serious trouble. The Special Warfare Command building was newer than most base structures, all clean lines and tinted windows. Inside, the air conditioning was aggressive enough to raise goosebumps. The receptionist directed her to a conference room on the third floor where she was told to wait. Kira sat in one of the chairs facing the door and reviewed what she knew. Holloway had connections throughout the SEAL community. His combat record was legitimate. He had influential friends who would view his defeat as an insult to their entire culture. She had embarrassed him publicly, and men like Holloway rarely forgave that kind of humiliation. The door opened. 3 officers entered, all men, all wearing the trident insignia that marked them as SEALs. The senior officer was a captain with gray threading through his hair and the weathered look of someone who had spent decades in harsh environments. The other 2 were commanders, younger, but carrying themselves with the same confident authority. The captain took the seat directly across from Kira. "I am Captain Raymond Thorne," he said without preamble. "These are Commander Hayes and Commander Sullivan. We are here to discuss the incident that occurred in your training facility yesterday." Kira kept her expression neutral. "Yes, sir." Captain Thorne opened a folder and scanned the contents. "Staff Sergeant Holloway has filed a formal complaint alleging that you used excessive force during what was supposed to be a controlled demonstration. He claims you deliberately injured him and that your conduct was unprofessional and vindictive." Kira had expected this. The demonstration was witnessed by approximately 50 personnel, sir. Multiple officers were present, including Lieutenant Commander Ashford and Chief Petty Officer Webb. The events are well documented. Commander Hayes leaned forward. "Documentation aside, you physically dominated a decorated SEAL instructor in front of his students and peers. You understand how that looks from our perspective? It damages unit cohesion and undermines the reputation of our training programs." "With respect, sir, Staff Sergeant Holloway undermined the training program himself," Kira replied. "He disrupted multiple sessions with inappropriate comments and challenges. He created a hostile learning environment. The demonstration was his choice, conducted under his terms." Captain Thorne closed the folder and fixed Kira with a hard stare. "Sergeant Holloway has served honorably for 12 years. He has combat citations and has trained hundreds of operators. You're an outside instructor who has been here less than a week. You see the problem? The problem is that his record does not excuse his behavior," Kira said carefully. She knew she was walking a dangerous line. The harassment complaints filed by female personnel, the toxic culture he has fostered, Those issues existed before I arrived. Commander Sullivan spoke for the first time. You are aware that 2 of those harassment complaints were deemed unsubstantiated after investigation? Were they unsubstantiated, sir, or were they inconvenient? Kira met his eyes directly, because from where I stand, it looks like protecting reputation was prioritized over addressing legitimate concerns. The room temperature seemed to drop several degrees. Captain Thorne's expression hardened. You're dangerously close to insubordination, Sergeant. I am dangerously close to stating facts that make people uncomfortable, Kira replied. She knew she should stop, should back down, and accept whatever reprimand they planned to deliver. But something in her refused to bend. I was brought here under orders from Naval Special Warfare Command to upgrade combat training protocols. Staff Sergeant Holloway opposed that mission from the beginning. Everything that happened yesterday was the direct result of his decision to challenge the program publicly. Captain Thorne stood abruptly. You will cease instruction immediately pending the outcome of this investigation. You are confined to base and will have no contact with training personnel. We will interview witnesses and review all available evidence before making a final determination. Kira stood as well, maintaining military bearing. Yes, sir. May I ask how long the investigation is expected to take? As long as necessary, Commander Hayes said. You would be wise to consider whether continuing this assignment is in your best interest. Transfer requests are always an option. The implicit threat was clear. Leave quietly or face professional consequences that could derail her entire career. Kira recognized the pattern, had seen it happen to other women who challenged the established order. The system protected its own, and she was not one of its own. She was dismissed and escorted from the building by a junior officer who maintained uncomfortable silence during the walk. Back in her quarters, Kira sat on the edge of her bed and considered her options. She could request transfer, retreat with her career mostly intact, or she could stand her ground and face whatever political machinery Holloway's supporters could bring to bear. Her phone buzzed. A text from Chief Webb. They are interviewing trainees, trying to find witnesses who will support Holloway's version. So far, no one is backing his story. Everyone saw what really happened. A second text followed immediately. Petty Officer Ramirez and 3 other female sailors have submitted sworn statements about Holloway's harassment. Timeline goes back 18 months. This is bigger than one training incident now. Kira felt something shift. What had started as a personal confrontation was becoming a reckoning with systemic problems. The investigation could go either way, but at least the truth was being documented. That evening, confined to her quarters, Kira received an unexpected visitor. Lieutenant Commander Ashford stood at her door, holding a manila envelope. May I come in? She stepped aside. Ashford entered and closed the door behind him. He looked tired, like someone who had spent the day in difficult meetings. I'm not supposed to be here, he said. This conversation is not happening officially. Understood, sir. He handed her the envelope. Inside were printed emails and incident reports. Captain Thorne and his officers are trying to protect the SEAL community's reputation, Ashford said quietly. They view what happened as a public relations disaster that needs to be contained. You're the easiest target. Kira examined the documents Ashford had brought. They detailed Holloway's pattern of harassment going back nearly 2 years, complaints that had been filed and quietly dismissed, transfers requested by female personnel who cited hostile work environment. The paper trail painted a damning picture of institutional failure. However, Ashford continued, there is another aspect to this situation that Captain Thorne and his officers are not fully aware of. He met her eyes directly. Your service record is partially classified. The sections dealing with your work in Afghanistan and your role in specialized training programs are redacted in standard personnel files. Kira felt her stomach tighten. Those classifications existed for good reasons. Sir, that information is need to know. Ashford nodded. And Captain Thorne needs to know. He is making decisions based on incomplete information. He sees you as an outside instructor with standard credentials. He does not understand what you actually are. What I actually am is irrelevant to whether Holloway's behavior was appropriate, Kira said. Legally, yes. Politically, no. Ashford sat in the room's only chair. I made some calls today to people I know in Special Operations Command. I asked them about the Urban Reaper program. Do you know what they told me? Kira remained silent. They told me that program trained Tier 1 operators in advanced close-quarters combat for urban counterinsurgency operations. They told me the head instructor was a Marine sergeant who had more documented hand-to-hand combat engagements than most operators see in their entire careers. They told me that instructor trained members of SEAL Team 6, Delta Force, and Allied Special Forces from 7 different countries. Ashford leaned forward. They told me that instructor's identity remains classified because several enemy organizations have bounties on her head specifically for how many of their fighters she killed or trained others to kill. The classified details hung between them like smoke. Kira had spent 5 years running that program, operating in some of the most dangerous urban environments on Earth. She had fought in situations where firearms were tactically inadvisable or politically impossible. She had survived encounters that would have killed most soldiers, and she had trained operators to do the same, saving countless lives in the process. That program is classified for operational security reasons, Kira said carefully. Revealing details could compromise ongoing missions. Captain Thorne has the clearance to know, Ashford replied, and he needs to understand that yesterday's demonstration was not some lucky instructor getting the better of an arrogant student. It was one of the most highly trained close-quarters combat specialists in the U.S. military defending the integrity of a training program against someone who never stood a chance. Revealing that information makes this personal, Kira said. It becomes about credentials and reputation rather than about addressing systemic harassment. Ashford stood. With respect, Sergeant, it is already personal. Holloway made it personal when he filed his complaint. Captain Thorne made it political when he suspended you. The question now is whether you fight this battle with all your weapons or with one hand tied behind your back. After Ashford left, Kira sat with the weight of the decision. Her classified service record was her nuclear option, the evidence that would definitively prove her expertise. But using it felt like admitting that her demonstrated competence was not enough, that she still needed the approval of male authority figures who would only respect her after learning about her secret credentials. The next morning brought another summons, this time to Captain Thorne's private office rather than a conference room. Kira arrived in uniform again, prepared for whatever judgment had been reached. Captain Thorne sat behind his desk, but his demeanor had changed noticeably from their previous meeting. Standing beside him was a Navy captain she did not recognize, an older man with the kind of bearing that suggested very senior command. Sergeant First Class Brennan, Captain Thorne said, his voice carefully neutral. This is Captain Richard Vance from Naval Special Warfare Command. He has some questions for you. Captain Vance studied her with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Sergeant Brennan, I need to confirm some details about your service history. You were the primary instructor for a classified training program operating out of Bugram Air Base from 2019 to 2023? Yes, sir, Kira replied. And during that period, you personally trained operators from SEAL Teams 2, 5, and 6 in urban combat techniques? Among others, yes, sir. Captain Vance pulled a folder from his briefcase. I have here commendations from 3 different SEAL team commanders praising your instruction. One of them states, and I quote, Sergeant Brennan's training directly saved the lives of 4 team members during operations in Fallujah. Her techniques are combat-proven and should be mandatory for all Tier 1 operators. Captain Thorne's expression had shifted from stern authority to uncomfortable realization. He had not known. Despite having access to her service record, the classified sections had been redacted deeply enough that he had made assumptions about her background. Captain Vance continued, I also have documentation showing that you personally engaged in 17 separate close-quarters combat situations during your time in theater. In 14 of those engagements, you successfully neutralized enemy combatants without firearms. In 2 others, you extracted wounded personnel while under direct assault. He closed the folder. Your code name in the intelligence community is Reaper 6. Multiple enemy organizations have standing bounties for information about your identity. The silence in the office was absolute. Captain Thorne was staring at Kira as if seeing her for the first time. The arrogant certainty he had displayed during their first meeting had evaporated completely. Staff Sergeant Holloway challenged one of the most dangerous hand-to-hand combat specialists currently serving in the United States military, Captain Vance said. He did so based on assumptions about gender and qualifications that were completely unfounded. His complaint alleging excessive force is not just wrong, it is embarrassing. Captain Thorne found his voice. I was not aware of the full scope of Sergeant Brennan's background. The classified sections of her record were more extensive than I realized. That is precisely why this situation is problematic, Captain Vance replied. Sergeant Brennan was sent here specifically because Special Warfare Command identified deficiencies in your hand-to-hand combat training protocols. She has the expertise to address those deficiencies. Instead of supporting that mission, your staff undermined it based on prejudice and ego. Captain Vance turned his attention fully to Kira. The investigation into Staff Sergeant Holloway has uncovered a pattern of harassment that extends well beyond the training incident. Multiple sworn statements from female personnel detail behaviors that constitute violation of military conduct standards. The harassment complaints that were previously dismissed are being reopened with proper oversight. Captain Thorne shifted uncomfortably in his chair. His entire posture had changed, the aggressive confidence replaced by the tension of someone realizing they had made serious errors in judgment. Captain Vance, I take full responsibility for the failures and oversight that allowed this situation to develop. You will have that opportunity during the formal review, Vance replied curtly. For now, we need to address the immediate situation. He looked back at Kira. Sergeant Brennan, your suspension is lifted effective immediately. You will resume instruction with full authority. Additionally, I am authorizing you to expand the training program to include all SEAL candidates currently on base. This is no longer optional attendance. Thank you, sir, Kira said. Captain Thorne spoke up, his voice strained. What about Holloway? Staff Sergeant Holloway is being reassigned pending a full investigation into the harassment allegations, Vance said. Given the severity and duration of the reported behavior, he will likely face non-judicial punishment at minimum. His future with naval special warfare is in serious question. The implications settled heavily in the room. Holloway's career, built over 12 years of service, was effectively over. Not because he lost a training demonstration, but because his pattern of toxic behavior had finally been documented thoroughly enough that it could not be ignored or dismissed. Kira felt no triumph in this outcome. She had not wanted to destroy anyone's career. She had simply wanted to teach a course without harassment, to do the job she had been assigned. But Holloway had made different choices at every turn, and now he would face the consequences. Captain Vance handed Kira a document. This is a direct authorization from Naval Special Warfare Command. It grants you access to any training facilities or resources you require. It also makes clear that interference with your instruction will be treated as insubordination. He paused. I am sorry that it took this long for the command structure to support you properly. After the meeting, word spread through the base with remarkable speed. Kira returned to the training facility to find it already filling with personnel who wanted to observe or participate. The energy had completely transformed from her first sessions. Instead of skepticism and hostility, she encountered respect and genuine curiosity. Chief Webb was waiting for her in the facility office. The entire SEAL community is talking about you, he said with a slight smile. Reaper 6, they're saying you trained the team that took down that high-value target in Mosul last year. I cannot confirm or deny involvement in specific operations, Kira replied, but her expression suggested the rumors were not entirely unfounded. Fair enough, Webb said. What I can confirm is that you have more credibility now than any outside instructor has ever had on this base. The candidates are actually excited for your training. That never happens. The afternoon session brought a completely different dynamic. 70 people filled the facility, including SEAL candidates who had not been part of the original course roster. They arranged themselves on the mats with disciplined attention, waiting for instruction. Kira stood before them and let the silence settle before speaking. What happened earlier this week was unfortunate but instructive, she began. It demonstrated that assumptions about capability based on appearance or gender are not just prejudiced, they are tactically dangerous. In combat, underestimating an opponent gets you killed. She scanned the assembled faces. My job here is to teach you techniques that will keep you alive in situations where firearms are not an option. Whether you choose to learn them is up to you. She called for volunteers and got them immediately. Over the next 3 hours, she demonstrated advanced techniques with a level of detail she had not been able to provide in previous sessions. She showed them how to fight from disadvantaged positions, how to use an opponent's strength against them, how to identify vulnerabilities in body mechanics. Every technique was explained with clear mechanical principles and practical application scenarios. The SEAL candidates absorbed everything with focused intensity. These were men who had survived some of the hardest training in the military, who understood that every skill could mean the difference between life and death. They asked intelligent questions and practiced with genuine effort. During a break, one of the senior SEAL candidates approached Kira. "Ma'am, I need to apologize for my behavior during the first sessions. I assumed you did not have the experience to teach us. I was completely wrong." "Apology accepted," Kira said. "Use it as a learning experience. The best operators are the ones who can admit when they are wrong and adapt." Over the following days, Kira's reputation on base solidified. Female personnel sought her out to thank her for standing up to Holloway, for proving that competence could overcome entrenched prejudice. Several women expressed interest in attending her training sessions, wanting to learn the same techniques. Petty Officer Ramirez appeared at Kira's quarters one evening. "Ma'am, I wanted you to know that 4 other women and I have filed official complaints about Holloway's behavior. Because of your situation, the command is taking them seriously this time. We finally feel like we might get justice." Kira invited her in. That took courage. Filing complaints against someone with his connections is not easy. "It was easier after watching you face him down," Ramirez replied. "You showed us that we did not have to accept his behavior, that standing up to bullies was possible even when they seemed untouchable." 2 weeks into the investigation, Captain Thorne requested a private meeting with Kira. He looked like he had aged years in the brief time since their first encounter. His office, which had felt intimidating before, now just seemed like another military workspace. "Sergeant Brennan, I owe you an apology," he said without preamble. "I made assumptions about your capabilities based on incomplete information and personal bias. I prioritized protecting the reputation of the SEAL community over addressing legitimate problems within it. That was wrong." Kira appreciated the directness. "Apology accepted, sir. What matters now is moving forward and ensuring the situation does not repeat itself." "Agreed," Thorne said. "I have recommended significant changes to how harassment complaints are handled in special warfare units. I have also recommended that your training program be made mandatory for all SEAL candidates before they deploy." He paused. "For what it is worth, I have learned something important from this experience. Sir, that protecting reputation is meaningless if the reputation is not worth protecting," Thorne said quietly. The investigation concluded after 3 weeks of interviews, document review, and testimony from dozens of witnesses. Staff Sergeant Derek Holloway was formally charged with conduct unbecoming, harassment of subordinates, and creating a hostile work environment. He accepted non-judicial punishment rather than face court-martial, receiving a reduction in rank, forfeiture of pay, and reassignment to a non-training position at a different installation. His career as a SEAL instructor was over. Kira felt no satisfaction in his downfall. She had wanted accountability, not destruction. But Holloway had built his own fate through years of toxic behavior that the system had finally been forced to acknowledge. The real victory came in the changes that followed. Naval Special Warfare Command issued new protocols for handling harassment complaints, requiring independent investigation rather than internal review. Female personnel received clear channels for reporting misconduct without fear of retaliation. Training programs were audited for institutional bias. The culture that had protected Holloway began to shift, slowly but measurably. Kira's course expanded to 3 months and became mandatory for all SEAL candidates. She trained over 200 operators during that period, teaching them techniques that would save lives in future deployments. The initial skepticism had transformed into genuine respect. SEAL team commanders requested her presence for specialized training sessions. Other bases inquired about bringing her in for similar programs. On a cool morning 6 months after her arrival, Kira stood on the beach watching the sun rise over the Pacific. Her assignment at Coronado was ending. She had accomplished what she came to do and more. The training program was established. The culture had shifted, and female personnel could serve without facing the systematic harassment that had been normalized under Holloway's influence. Chief Webb found her there, his boots crunching on the sand. "Heard you were shipping out next week," he said. "Afghanistan again," Kira replied. "Another training rotation, different base." "They will miss you here," Webb said. "You changed things. Not just the training program, but the whole atmosphere. Women can actually serve without being harassed now. That matters." "It should not have taken a confrontation to make that happen," Kira said. "The system should have addressed it years ago." "Agreed," Webb replied. "But sometimes the system needs someone willing to force the issue. You did that." He extended his hand. "It was an honor working with you, Reaper 6. She shook his hand firmly. "The honor was mine, Chief." That afternoon, Kira taught her final class at Coronado. The training facility was packed beyond capacity, with personnel standing along the walls and sitting in the observation area. Lieutenant Commander Ashford had arranged for the session to be recorded for future training reference. Kira demonstrated advanced escape techniques, showing how to break free from holds that seemed impossible to counter. She explained the biomechanics clearly, answered questions patiently, and corrected form with the same attention to detail she had shown from the beginning. These were students now, not skeptics. They valued her expertise because she had proven it beyond any doubt. As the session wound down, one of the senior SEAL candidates raised his hand. "Ma'am, on behalf of all of us, thank you. You taught us things that will genuinely keep us alive. More than that, you showed us that real strength is not about size or aggression. It is about skill, discipline, and the courage to challenge assumptions." The facility erupted in applause. Kira felt unexpected emotion rising in her chest. She had not expected this, had not realized how much the respect of these operators would mean after everything that had happened. Lieutenant Commander Ashford stepped forward once the applause subsided. "Sergeant First Class Brennan has been the most impactful instructor this base has seen in my 15 years here. She has elevated our training standards, addressed cultural problems we should have fixed long ago, and proven that expertise transcends any demographic assumptions." He turned to face her directly. "The Naval Special Warfare Command has requested that you return in 6 months for an advanced instruction cycle. We will be honored to have you back." Kira nodded her acceptance. It would be her privilege to return. That evening, Petty Officer Ramirez and several other female personnel hosted an informal gathering in Kira's honor. They met at a small restaurant off base, away from military formality. The women shared stories about how the culture had changed, how they felt safer and more respected, how Holloway's departure had lifted a weight they had not fully realized they were carrying. One sailor, a young woman who had seriously considered leaving the Navy, spoke up. "You did not just teach combat techniques, ma'am. You showed us that we belong here, that our capabilities matter more than anyone's prejudices. That changed everything for me." Similar sentiments echoed around the table. Kira listened and realized that the confrontation with Holloway, as brutal as it had been, had created space for these women to claim their rightful place in an institution that had tried to marginalize them. Her final morning at Coronado brought one last surprise. As she loaded her truck, a figure approached from across the parking lot. Staff Sergeant Holloway, though his rank insignia now showed demotion to sergeant, walked with none of his former swagger. He looked smaller somehow, diminished not just in rank, but in presence. Kira tensed instinctively, unsure what to expect. Holloway stopped several feet away, maintaining respectful distance. "I did not expect you to accept this," he said quietly, "but I need to say it anyway. I am sorry for the harassment, the disruption, the toxic behavior. You were right about everything, and I was completely wrong." Kira studied him carefully, looking for signs of manipulation or false contrition. She saw only exhaustion and genuine regret. "What will you do now?" Holloway shrugged. "Administrative work at a supply depot in Virginia. My SEAL career is finished." He met her eyes. "But maybe that is what I needed. To lose everything before I could see how badly I had been acting. The investigation forced me to confront things about myself I had been avoiding for years." "Good luck, Sergeant," Kira said. She meant it. As she drove through the base gates for the last time, Kira reflected on everything that had happened since her arrival. She had come to teach a course and had ended up transforming culture. The cost had been significant, the conflict brutal, but the outcome justified the struggle. Her phone buzzed with a text from Captain Vance. "Well done at Coronado. Your next assignment will be briefed upon arrival in Kabul. Expect similar resistance, similar challenges. You have proven you can handle them. The military needs more people willing to fight these battles." Kira smiled and set the phone aside. There would always be another Holloway at another base, another institutional barrier to overcome. But there would also be more Ramirez's, more women and men who needed someone to show them that competence and courage could overcome entrenched prejudice. If you enjoyed this story, drop a comment and let us know your favorite part or character, or share if you have witnessed someone prove their doubters wrong through skill and determination in your own life. These moments of triumph matter, and your stories matter too. The highway stretched ahead toward the next challenge, the next opportunity to prove that expertise transcends assumptions. Kira accelerated onto the interstate, ready for whatever came next.